Let's roll. This is Countercharge, your podcast for ranks, flanks, and kings of war. Join your hosts as they delve into the world of Panithor and bring you worldwide coverage of all things Kings of War.
Welcome to Countercharge. I'm Tom Annis.
I'm Brenton Williams.
And I am Jeremy Duvall. Welcome on this night before Christmas Eve, a very special holiday edition of the sparkling Scrying Gems. We're coming down your chimney with some holiday cheer. Some holiday cheer. I want to be inclusive of everyone in our family. Some holiday cheer, and to talk about a little 4th edition, where we sort of think maybe the meta might land, where we think what looks good, what doesn't look good. We're going to talk a little bit today sort of about those key archetypes that we've talked about, like the grind list, the combined arms list, the alpha list. Maybe as we're looking at armies, we'll sort of look through those lenses to see where we think those archetypes might end. Disclaimer, as always, when we do these meta reviews, or these are just our opinions, and especially with the new edition, we've played some games, but these lists were changing up all the way up until the very end of the playtest process. So, a lot of this is going to be some theory, some just thinking on, just our experience, what we think. And, maybe in 6 months we'll be right, and maybe in 6 months we'll be wrong. But Tom, let's start with you. I haven't had you on in a little bit. How have you been? How's your fall, winter getting along? What have you been up to?
Yeah, I've been good. Going to a couple tournaments in the fall. Went to Dojo in September, and then Mark Cox's team's tournament here just a couple weeks ago. Naughty or Nice. I've been playing games, but honestly, I've just been waiting for 4th edition to drop. It's kind of hard to keep playing 3rd when 4th is just around the corner. So I've been keeping my toe in the hobby, but really just waiting for right now. I'm excited about all the new possibilities and combinations and theories that everybody's throwing out there kind of in the first week or so of having the book out. So yeah, it's an exciting time.
I'm curious, we'll get into it more as we start the main discussion, but do you have sort of like the army that you're going to try first, or do you still have a couple things you're looking at? Are you going to return to our first love, the Base Aliens trademark, or are you maybe looking, I know you've dibbled your toes in a lot of different gardens in the Kings of War army universe. What do you think you're going to start with?
Yeah. Well, I think there's two ways to build an army. One is you come up with a list first, right? And you have a very specific idea of how this army list is going to work. And then you build that list with those models. And I have a couple armies like that. And given all the changes with unlocks and core units and needing a heck of a lot more infantry, those armies are going to need some work. So I'm looking for armies that I've done the opposite with, which is just, I like the army, I collect them, I have a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Those armies are kind of surviving the jump a little bit better. So right now it's just about what can I get on the table quickly to play a 2,300-ish point game. So yeah, that's Basileia, that's Undead for me. And then I'm going to have to work on some of my other armies over the course of the edition.
Well, happy to have you on. Always great to chit chat. I know we've had a chance to get a couple games in lately, which is always super fun. Britton, I know we haven't talked in a little bit. I know things have been super busy with you. What have you been up to? Any chance to get any hobby in or any games, or has it just been work, family stuff? What's last few months been like for you?
I sort of burnt out for a little while, and am on the upswing coming back from that. And it's not burnt out in a bad way. It was more of I was doing rules committee and we were hosting masters, and then playing and hosting another event and that stuff. So it all kind of came to head in the summer, where it was like, get through masters, host a good tournament for all of the people that traveled from all across the country, and like get through that and get through some other stuff. And then it was like, I just need to take a big breath. And so my fall has been that big breath. And now I get to kind of come back this winter and say, okay, let's play some 4th. Let's see what's going on. Let's do some more stuff. So yeah, I haven't been hobbying. I've just now kind of got all my paints and other stuff back out. I am doing the normal sort of assessment of like, how did my army survive the transition to fourth? And what is the closest one to being able to be on the table with the minimal amount of new units? Sadly, there's not a lot of that. I have a lot of units to paint before anything's really playable. Yeah, I'm just trying to identify like, what can I play for getting in some games of fourth?
I feel like you're talking about that need to shake up the game, right? You want to add in variety, you want to add in new stuff to do. Also, you're a company, right? So there's always that element of, you're still trying to create a buzz and wanting people to get excited to buy new models, add new units, stuff like that. But where do we feel about that sort of that wanting to do that, but also not wanting people to not be able to play the army that they played in the last edition? I feel it's kind of like it's a slider, and maybe there's two polar ends. Like, I want some change. I want a reason to buy a new unit. For me personally, I like to try new things, but I don't want to be like, oh well, crap, that whole army that took me 2 years to paint is unplayable. I mean, is there a sweet spot in between those two things? Or so I know there's some tension there. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, look, let's be honest. I don't think Mantic was happy with the trajectory that King's War was on and felt like they needed to shake it up. I understand that, and they want to bring it in line with some of their other games as far as the unlocking system and the command orders and things that some of their other games are known for. And so I don't begrudge them that at all. And I do think that there was an effort made to preserve army lists in units with some exception. And so I can see that, like the Varangur still being a thing, for example. That's an example of Mantic trying to accommodate players' armies. But then again, there's also the Green Lady, which that same effort wasn't made. So I think Mantic, they've been trending this way for a couple of years, where they're saying, hey, we're going to make units for models that we make, and if the unit doesn't have a model, then you're taking a risk playing it. And I think we saw some of that come home in fourth edition. So it's a balance. There's tension between those two goals. I don't know. Different people have different opinions about whether they succeeded in that, striking that balance.
I think to a certain degree, it's a can't-win situation in that they needed to simplify their game rules to be closer to their product line and be more balanceable. At the same time, it's a miniature wargaming hobby. It's not a video game. It's not a card game. It's each unit, each stat line, each thing in your army takes hours and hours of work and sort of love and craft and whatever to go into it. So it changing or having an unlock system that no longer allows you to play the army you were playing before feels a lot more personal than it does in other kinds of sort of competitive gaming. So it's really difficult. It's a hard line to walk. And I think the important thing is to just recognize that most people who feel like their armies have been cut out from under them feel bad about it because they want to play the game and are coming from a place of like excitement and love for the game that they feel is less accessible to them in a certain way, whether they're right or wrong. So that we have to remind ourselves, like, these are fans of the game who want to play and feel like there's another barrier between them and that can not feel good. But I don't know what the honest answer is to correct that, other than just there's a mixture between how much you make people change and not. And I'm not sure the balance on that was quite right this time, but I also think it's a pretty tough target to hit. You're aiming at a small target on that to get everyone as happy as you can be, and there was no way to make everyone happy.
Yeah, I think it's that sweet spot. I just think of like if the earth is the size of a basketball and you're trying to get through the atmosphere, you got to get through that thing that's like only as wide as a piece of paper. That sweet spot truly is difficult.
I know some of it is a me problem, right? From my stance, I make weird armies. I made weird armies based on the open nature of Kings of War. I don't mean I made spammy, super powerful lists, but I made weird ones that played in a specific way that was interesting to me and did things differently. So when they standardized things a lot more and made armies a lot more regimented in how they're built and what they look like, it hit me. It hit, my 4 most recent armies are not capable of being fielded as they are. And that's, so it hit me. it's my fault. I made weird armies, but still doesn't feel good.
And I think that's something to keep in mind too, is that those are the ones that I feel the worst for. Nobody's crying for, the super competitive guy who built a super powerful army because it was powerful and now can't play it. Those players are already on to the next thing, and nobody's feeling bad for Jeff Radigan's, 8 Scorchwing hordes that he can't play anymore. But I do feel for the people like Britain who make cool themed armies and now can't get them on the table. And hopefully, we will see as these armies come out in future books, hopefully some of the basic lists get maybe some of the options that they had in previous versions of the game to come back, or different units that could become core, things like that. So those players can use those armies sooner rather than later.
But I also feel like I started out with a bunch of complaining, which I didn't mean to do. I'm excited to play games of Fourth, and I'm figuring out the closest path to get there. That's the important thing. So less of the complaining and more of the, hey, I'm just figuring out ways to play.
And some things I do like. I feel like there has been a lot of interesting building blocks put into the list. So maybe we haven't seen sort of the full realization yet of have this warlord, it unlocks these as troops, or I have this warlord I want to take, but these specialists need to stay specialists because if they become core, it screws up my whole, But I think that element or that design thread in the chromosome of thinking about heroes unlocking or changing, that to me is a really interesting space that I'm glad is built into the core of the rules. So maybe as different book comes out, that might be an area that they explore more, right? Thinking about how your warlords can alter your design choices.
Yeah. And what I was thinking is, come out with a new warlord model that all of a sudden switches up what you can take as core or support to specialists or things like that. That'd be a great way for Mantic to make a little bit of money and not have to come out with new army lines. So who knows, maybe
they do like a summer, like their summer event is each army gets a new general or a new warlord, and that warlord will unlock something thematic, right? So a really great idea, and I think that's an interesting space they have now in this new because in many ways it's like you got to start. If you want to have an edition that you can build on over the years, in some ways you kind of have to go back to the bare bones, right? When you're repainting a house, you got to strip everything, right? And then you start building back. So I wonder, what do you guys think about that? What do you think? Has that set with you in any sort of type of way? That concept of where we're starting over. This is sort of an edition reset in many ways. We're going to strip back a little bit, but our plan then is we now have some place to go over the next couple of years. I mean, what do you guys sort of, how do you orbit around that idea?
I mean, I absolutely, it is a stripped back. It is a simplification of the army lists, especially the rules, some, but the army lists especially. When I read through them, they're a lot more straightforward. There's a lot less synergies built in. There's a lot less sort of various tribal factions with overlapping sort of advantages or disadvantages. There's a little of that. A lot of the rough edges of very powerful, not entirely, and we'll get into that, but I feel like there are a lot of things when I read through that were like, hey, didn't that used to be a little stronger? Didn't that used to have a little more spice to it? You look at things like Krim, you look at other things where it just feels like they got the edges sanded down and everything's less dangerous in that, and also less scary and less complicated. So it does feel like a big simplification across the army lists, and hopefully that gets built on in the future to add back a lot of that spice. But right now it definitely feels like it is the building blocks, the base of the soup, and does not yet have all the spices.
Yeah, that was, I'm a wargaming version in the sense of Kings of War is the only war game that I ever played. So, but one thing I appreciated, even not knowing any better, was the fact that the armies, generally speaking, got updated at the same time, and we're on a level playing field. And I understand in other games that that's not always the case. And so this feels new to me, where we have certain armies in a different book right at the start of the edition, and then they're going to be rolling them out, 4 or so at a time over the course of the edition. So I'm not quite sure what to think about that. And hopefully that doesn't mean that the armies that are in the last book or two are waiting the entire edition for kind of their cool stuff. But I'm a little wary of that. As far as, again, I don't begrudge Mantic wanting to cut the units down to ones that they make models for. Maybe they plan to make models for. Again, I recognize that's what they're doing. I don't necessarily like it. I do agree a lot of the lists are boring, or just, I like the structure of the warlords and, the keywords and the synergies. The potential is there. I just don't know that they've met that in a lot of the armies. In third, I felt the RC with Mantic was doing an excellent job of building really interesting army lists with synergies and units that each kind of had a defined role. I'm thinking like the Twilight Kin and the Northern Alliance, Halflings. Those were all great examples of really flavorful, synergistic armies. And so the quicker we can get back to that across all the armies, the better.
Yeah, I think in some ways, they've set the formula for what they want. And a pure Norman Osborne way, some of us were yelling, back to formula, but in many ways, that's what they did. They said, we're going to go back to formula. We like maybe how the game is, and this is just my opinion, this is no inside baseball, as Rob would say, but it's looking at the game and maybe thinking that, well, in some areas it's doing well, but in other areas, maybe it's not doing as well. So we want to try something new. Look at ways that they can sort of reinvigorate Kings. And part of this sort of, on the one hand, the army design, but also this new design philosophy, right? Of not all the armies at once. And then a yearly update with here are the core armies, here are your more completed armies. And I had a flashback to the Rubber Band Man as Tom rotated his camera to show me his crotch for a second and then put it back on his face. I was like, is this Rubber Band Man 2.0? Like, all you old After Dark veterans will remember the Rubber Band Man.
I was looking around for my water. Sorry.
It's okay. I forgive you. But so it's going to be interesting, right? Because they've introduced some new things, right? Outside of just game mechanics, stuff like they introduced some new ways that we're going to get Kings. Right, is we're going to be getting this difference between sort of the starter armies now and then the full armies. Coming from other war games, Britain, the Spectre are the ghost of Codex creep, are of the, hey man, I'm playing Bretonians and it takes me 8 years to get a new army book or whatever. I think I wonder if in the zeitgeist of gamers, that sort of just that negative connotation with that maybe dwindles a little bit. But I'm wondering, how is Manta going to, again, shoot for that sweet spot of not necessarily introducing everything at once, but keeping it on a quick pace, making sure everything's still balanced? Or what do you think?
I mean, it's a tough tightrope to walk, but I mean, I think the reality is they had to do this. It is too many armies with too few people to give them an entire overhaul, new units, revise things, multiple command orders, all of that stuff all at once. They kind of, like, if you look at during the last couple Clash of Kings updates, they've introduced one, maybe two new armies.
Fantastic point, right? That's just the whole team working on one thing, let alone 28 things or whatever it is.
And the ability, so I think to a certain degree, and people can argue whether they liked the way they did it or didn't, or some of the individual choices, but I think the reality we have to understand is that, like, they could not support 28 armies very well, and they could not release however many of the remaining armies are left all at once with full lists. They made that choice very early on that wasn't possible, probably logistically, and again, I'm assuming some here, and that it has to be done this way. And their attempt at doing 4 at a time over an accelerated schedule is to get everyone whole sort of as quickly as they can manage over time. That, like, we can release 4 armies at a time over 2 years, and in 2 years everyone will be fully up to date. We will be updating along the way, etc. And that's kind of the best they can do with the time they have. So to a certain degree, it doesn't matter if I like that schedule or not. It's what can be performed. I'd rather they had a manageable one than try and gut out 20 plus armies in the time they had. In terms of codex creep, that's just what generally happens is there's the negative form of that, which is we need to sell new models and we're going to make the new cool things better. And then there's the, I think, more difficult one, which is we're not trying to overpower these things, but we're definitely trying not to underpower them. And when we balance them, we want to make sure they're at least okay. And that gives you, within that margin of error, things being overpowered. I don't think anyone at Mantic is trying to make things overpowered just to sell them, but I think they will, if they're erring on the side of a little too good versus a little too bad, they're going to err towards a little too good. And that means that, you know, where you are in the release cycle for your particular army, you might not feel as much love. And what my hope is that they can maintain a sense of balance, that while some of the armies might not have as many commands or build directions, they're at least all competitive. That's the hope. Like, you might not have as many options, but you're not losing the game in the army picking phase.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I at least my experience with Mantic has been the specter of codex creep, as we're calling it, is not really that they overpower their new stuff. I think maybe we saw a little bit of that with the Twilight Kin in 3rd edition, but they had no trouble, you know, snapping that back pretty quickly on some of the units that needed it. I don't think any of the armies in the first invasion book are particularly powerful. I mean, they're all good armies. They have more options, which is the best thing, more command options, more unit options in some of the more basic lists. But I don't view the threat as, you know, the new armies being the most powerful. It's just, it's the opposite. It's the more basic list. You know, it's the herd problem in 3rd edition. They were still playable. They were still good. They just never got anything interesting, really. And so that's, to me, more the concern than Mantic's going to make, you know, their new models too powerful.
What I find really interesting about the moment we're in is it's a new edition. It's been a while. And Kings was in a very, very different place when it transitioned from 1st to 2nd. So really the only thing I have to proxy against this is going from 2nd to 3rd and looking at what did the post 3rd edition, first kind of pre-first Clash of Kings of that edition look like? What did the world look like then? And how does that compare to what I'm sort of seeing in the lists and trends now? So that's what I've been doing a bunch is casting my mind back to the good old 2019, 2020, you know, pre-COVID, sweet summer child. Yeah. Masters in the US was still in the winter. I know it's way back, but looking back to that time and saying how much of that is applicable to now. So that's been my fun little thought exercise I've been doing.
And many of us came to 2nd edition or came to Kings of War after already 2nd edition. So we've been here for one edition change, right? This is our 2nd one. So it is interesting to take a look at sort of how those compare to each other. I know a lot of people have sort of, I guess your instinct is when you see a new edition to immediately go to your army list, right? But I think this edition of Kings has a lot of core rule mechanics or rule changes. What do you guys think about that? Let's say you're a competitive player, you like making, you know, good lists. You've played 3rd, but you're coming new to 4th. Is this a big enough rules change where generals should go to the rule book first and read through some of these core rules changes and then take a look at their list, or maybe take a look at the list and go back and forth? But, you know, where do you think we are sort of in that, as the change to the meta now that we're going to see is not just from the army list design and construction design, but how much are actually the core gameplay mechanics going to affect the type of lists we build?
I think as long as you look at, there's a few very big changes, and they could be small on the page, but big in the effect, that as long as you're keeping those in mind, a lot of the units, a lot of the profiles, a lot of the magic items, special rules, a lot of them still do the same thing. So you just have to learn those like key differences, a few of them, you know, the differences to nerve and shooting, the differences to combat, the extra pivot you get while moving, the ability to pivot in a charge intentionally to avoid terrain. Some of those things kind of inform you on what kind of big list building directions there will be. At the end of the day, it's still very much Kings of War in a lot of ways. So I don't think it's like a massive, you need to ignore everything about the army and go deep into the rules, as much as it is knowing those things are going to fundamentally change how we play.
Yeah, I think this edition change is different than the one from second to third for that exact reason, Jeremy. The rules have changed a lot more from third to fourth than second to third. And one thing that does to me is it makes specific unit types that maybe weren't that good in third edition a lot more interesting. So, like, for example, my kind of list building rule for myself, and I've said it a couple times in this podcast, is I never took large infantry regiments, what we now call troops. I never took large cavalry regiments, now called troops, because they're just too easy to waver. If they were fearless, then I'd consider them. Otherwise, I would never take that unit type. But now that there's a core rule change, which is waver doesn't exist anymore, really, you can do that. I mean, there's still a risk you get wavered from shooting, I guess, but on the whole, it makes those large infantry, large cavalry troops a real unit type to be considered. And that's the result of a core rule change and not a stat change in most cases for those units. The other unit type that I'm thinking of that comes to mind is big infantry hordes. I think the kind of melee combat infantry hordes like Orc Legionnaires or Elf Palace Guard, Twilight Kin, Spearmen, whatever they're called, those I think are some of the best units in the edition now. And that part of that is because of the change to only 2 units can charge a facing. And so that eliminates their biggest issue, which is it's just so hard to protect big hordes like that. And so it is really interesting to me how many core rule changes have taken place and what units are more or less valuable thinking through those changes.
I mentioned it on the show. Berserker Infantry is another one that stands out, or Defense 3 Infantry, that have high volume of attacks. I know it was played some point, but really, the wolves in Yellowstone, right, were either there or not there, depending on what side of the, if you were a fan of the wolf or not. But that was there are some key unit choices, right, that have we've seen sort of the landscape of that unit is different now within the greater context of the game.
And that's where I feel the parallels to sort of early third edition start coming in. Even though these are being generated by specific rule changes, I'm seeing some of the build archetypes and like directions people are going to be very similar, with a few notable exceptions around we'll talk about in a minute. But it's that idea that when you strip back the number of kind of synergies and special rules and complication to it, and you in some way, shape, or form like nerf shooting to a significant degree, what you create is an environment that prioritizes just good stats, just straight up like, does this unit have efficient stats? Can it survive? Can it march up the field and beat things up? It pushes shooting from the kind of like hybrid or chip shooting much more into either you're shooting or you're not. You're either a gun line or don't bother, which is very similar to early third edition. You had that Masters in New York was 6 6 war machines. Keith Randall brought 6 war machines. Some other folks, I think Chris Fisher, someone brought the 6 war machine build. Goblins with their tons of war machines. A person brought Kingdoms of Men that was all hordes of bowmen, basically. So it was sort of gunline or not. You had Herd doing really well there. You had and you had Eric Trowbridge winning with just big beat stick hordes of orcs. So I look back at some of those lists and that environment, and it feels like a lot of what I'm sort of seeing people start to coalesce around at the beginning of this, because those conditions are somewhat the same. Different ways it was achieved, but that we are lowering the effectiveness of shooting. So you either have to take a ton of it to get a result or don't worry so much about it. We are removing some shooting, we are upping the value of berserkers and big statty infantry blocks. Like I remember at the beginning of third, people were playing double Palace Guard Horde. And I look at the end of third and someone would laugh at you if you had double Palace Guard in a elf list. It's interesting to see, but yeah, it's a lot of it for me is just who has efficient stats and can you unlock them with the least amount of waste. and give them a good command.
Yeah, and I think when you say efficient stats too, what comes up for me, and I'm curious, we now exist within a world of a points formula for army points, right? And I think at its core, if you think about it, if you were to say, let's have a formula that calculates the value of everything in the game, faction to faction, so we know everything is using the same points value, everything is using the same thing. I think from a balance standpoint, you would be like, oh man, that sounds wonderful. When you're looking at that, the thing that sort of stands up to me is what maybe a general may value and what maybe a formula may value may not always be the same. Because when you look at it and you hear feedback, this thing's not costed correctly. One, it's either an error, right? There was a typo, or if you say this unit's wrong, right? It's points is wrong. Or those are the points based on the formula, and that formula is being used across every army, so thus balanced, right? Because the formula is being used everywhere. But it asks the question, what's our initial gut around, is the formula valuing certain things maybe too much, not enough? Or I do like the idea is we do have a baseline to go back to fix things, but where are we sort of in the thoughts when we're looking at just the general point landscape across the armies? Does anything sort of jump out at us?
Well, it probably surprises no one, but I've spent some time trying to figure out what this mysterious formula is, and I think I have a pretty good idea. And as far as I can tell, what the formula does is it has kind of a few independent buckets of value. So it prices out, what's your defense and what's your route value, what's your melee damage, how many attacks you have, do you have crushing strength or thunderous charge. It then multiplies that by speed. So the faster you are and the better melee you have, the more points you're going to cost. And then a couple other things. Like the big one for me is, I think the formula prices shooting separately on the assumption that it can be used, it's valued as if it can be used every turn, when in reality, we all know that's just not true. So I think some of the units that people have been complaining about early on, like I'm thinking about the Twilight Kin Wranglers, they went up in points a lot. And I think that's because of the new formula, which says, you can shoot pretty good and you can also fight pretty good. And so that is, they're priced independently as far as I can tell. So I think on some of those units, maybe whoever's in charge of this mysterious formula needs to go back and question whether that's the best thing. Because I think in third, they got a discount under the theory of like the same way with spellcasters, you can't use all your spells every single turn. So maybe the formula is not working there, but otherwise, as far as I can tell, everything's priced correctly, except for a few, misprints, like the Tidal Swarms have depth horror stats on accident. That's not a formula error. That's just a printing error. And so I'm okay generally as far as I can tell what the formula is doing, but I think some of the questions people have are a result of that kind of direction they took with it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not here to second guess it. I'm here, at least in this purpose, to like, where do we think the efficiencies are that we can find within that? And from a very general sense, it's that I feel like the more rules or roles or additional stuff a lot of units have in this first iteration, the less I like them. I like a lot of the very straightforward things that like do their one job well. And I find a lot of, which is weird for me because I like dumb mixed units that do a lot of things kind of half good, but interestingly. But I feel those units right now are priced more expensively than what I want to pay for their battlefield performance. Examples being like River Guard. Like I have an entire army of River Guard for Trident Realm. In the previous edition, they had Ensnare, which kept them alive, and they had access through synergies to a stealthy bubble. So they were resilient to shooting, not immune because they're still low defense, and stuck around in combat longer than you think they should. And that made them fun and interesting and kind of do a little of everything. They hit on 4, so they're not great in combat, but they have more attacks. When we look at them in this edition, they're just borderline, you can't base an army around them. Like you might throw a unit in to have some fun on a flank or do some wacky charges. but because they have so many different ways they do things, they have some crushing and slightly more attacks, but they don't hit as well. And they have fly and leaper, and they have access to a shooting if they want it. They just end up not being a price you want to pay. And I see that across a lot of units where the more they're sort of getting, the worse they get. Like the best giants in the list right now, I think, are the simplest ones. When you get to like the storm giant and some other stuff with all the rules piled on, you just don't want to pay. And that's where I feel there's a fit. The places to look right now are just the things that use the bare minimum of additions to their stat line to get the job done.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, you bring up a great point, right? And I guess I would add to that, one of the great aspects of having the system we have now is I feel it's a lot of knobs and levers and switches, but it's ones that they can alter. So in 6 months of feedback, if they feel maybe this stat they're costing too much or this, I think having the structure that it's there now there is some room that they can go in and do that tweaking that will tweak across the entire game. Right, we're just gonna have to wait and see, right, how that sort of shakes out.
And if you're looking for kind of efficiencies or how can you take advantage of the formula, you think about what it doesn't price. So as far as I can tell, it doesn't price synergies between units. It doesn't price the synergies between command orders. Like, for example, there's been a lot of discussion over the past couple of days about the Ratkin command orders and how they can give plague pots and snare to units, to 105 point wretch hordes. The formula is not taking into account the ability to do that, and so you should be looking for synergies instead of just saying, "Hey, I'm going to take this undercosted unit," because there really are no undercosted units, at least according to the formula. And so instead of trying to take the most statted out units, synergies, look for units that do a role well and are not trying to do everything. I think the hybrid units are really suffering right now under the new formula.
Yeah, like you look at axe hordes and great axe hordes, didn't really change, but they got a command that gives them on average 4 more hits or more if you use Thonar, and suddenly they're a lot better because that command isn't part of that formula. So they're raw stats, and there's different examples of that sort of thing. I would argue like zombies feel pretty undercosted at the moment, but I could be wrong. The zombie hordes feel like a damn bargain, but I guess that's like where the stats meet out. So it can be hard to tell. But yeah, it's definitely a case where if you can find a way that thing you paid for gets better from something else outside of the formula, that's where you're going to find good units.
So that might be like our first sort of meta takeaway of the overall of let's say like your Dora the Explorer. Where are you going to look first in your army for value? It might be in those units or models that have very sort of specific thing they're trying to do.
Yeah, I think that's right. And this leads me to one of my big ideas, and I'm interested to see what you guys think about this. And Brenton, I think you're a perfect person to run this by and see if I'm crazy or if this makes any sense. So I've never played historical war games before, okay? But from what I understand, historical wargaming is a lot about maneuver and positioning and killing units through attrition, and not so much like video game, like big combinations, like, you cast Bane Chant on this unit and then you move, this standard bearer to get the Strider Aura, to get the Drakon Horde or whatever to be unhindered. It's much more about positioning and attrition. Okay. And so, and you don't have these big, crazy heroes. And so now my idea is in Kings of War 4th edition, with how much the heroes and support pieces have gone up in cost, maybe the best way to play is play it more like a historical game, where you take units that are good, that have decent stats, that can do, what you need them to do, but you're not taking the super uber You're not taking the super powerful casters or combat heroes, and instead you're really focusing on things that can combine well, infantry that are going to be covered by maybe a cavalry unit or something, and really how the units work together and how you use them to have board control and create kind of bad positioning for your opponents, much more than relying on powerful casters or powerful units. Does that make any type of sense to you guys?
I think the point you got to around like the ultimate effect on it is true. Absolutely. I think the thing people forget about most historical games is they're not played in a one-on-one tournament setting. So they're not played in a way in which you make a optimal list and you bring it to a battlefield trying to like surprise and defeat your opponent. It's, you play the army that existed in that battle, and things aren't that different from each other. And that's where I think it's getting similar, is that as a lot of the extra sort of spice is removed, it comes down to like small differences make a big difference. And when it's just sort of these stats out of a small range of numbers, your melee 3, melee 4, melee 5, defense 3, 4, 5, 6, it's a small range of differences that are going to have an even more pronounced difference. But I definitely think it's true that there is a lot more build a mutually supporting battle line and ram it against your opponent's mutually supported battle line and try and do it better. That's what it feels like right now.
What you said, Tom, is resonating with me in this way, and I wonder if this is sort of this where you're coming at. I feel the game now is more about a game of 1,000 cuts, where it's getting set up, using your tactics and your maneuvering and your positioning, and now I'm in combat, and now I'm just hoping I'm going to have a little bit more value in this combat than you have, or I'm going to get a little bit of a position here. I'm going to get a little. I don't feel it's as much as, okay, I'm either trying to or I'm protecting against that one charge where they set up all their stuff and then one-shot me. So much in 3rd edition was, I do not want to engage in combat unless it's for a specific scenario reason, unless I can kill you in one go. I mean, really, a lot of combat and charging in Kings was to take advantage of either a misplay or a flank or whatever and eliminate units. And I think that's that's harder to do in this new edition. It's a lot more engaged, stuck in combat, where you're looking, instead of for that one key, oh, I got your flank here, that's it, the game is lost. Instead, it's a culmination of lots of more smaller elements that happen in a game that sort of dictate where you're going.
It's less deadly, right? We didn't lose that much defense 6. We lost a lot of crushing. We lost better access to Bane Chant. We lost, triple, quadruple charging big units to the front. We've lost a number of the best Alpha Strike units in the game, are all no longer around. Where we don't have the flying circus from Green Lady keeping, everything pushed around. We don't have, the nimble Dracon situation. We don't have 5, 6 white lists. There's a lot of these things that would just smash your face in quickly that just aren't there. And I might be missing them. There's someone at home pulling their hair out, screaming at their whatever they're listening to this on, telling me I'm wrong about something. But it feels, it's not that there aren't really powerful units. I think there are still very strong units in the game. But I think it's missing that like speed plus power deadly combination is in as many places and as many ways to buff and like reduce the randomness of it, that it just feels a little bit less deadly. I think there will still be a lot of one-shots. There's plenty of units that will, smash the heck out of something, especially on a double charge. But it feels a tiny bit less deadly, which makes it feel more, a little more protracted. But also it feels like having a well-dressed battle line isn't as scary a place as it was in a lot of 3rd edition, with various nimble corkscrews and surges and all kinds of stuff happening, where if you were at all in a staggered battle line, I felt like any minute I was going to get charged in the flank by something that I thought was in front of me. And that feels a little less of a worry right now.
Yeah, and I think that the word that just keeps coming to my mind is it's more attrition-y. Like, it's more, the sticky combats make a huge difference in how the game plays. And it is just, it's more grindy, it's more attrition. And I think the game developers, designers kind of foresaw that a little bit with reducing the access to heal on some units and just overall across the game. Because I think heal and regen and Iron Resolve in this new sticky combat world are just even more powerful than they always have been. That's why things like every spellcaster getting access to Celestial Restoration 3 now, I think that's a huge deal that nobody's really talking about. But I'll bet you in a year we're going to see a lot of lists that build in one spellcaster just to take that spell once people realize how grindy combats really are.
And how much defense 6 is kicking around that can get healed by it so well.
And with some of the commands, I mean, the most powerful commands to me, some of them are the ones that are just a dressed up heal spell. It's like, you can get an extra dice with an item, and suddenly you have heal 3 on your priest or whatever, but you also have a command order. So now it's in effect heal 6. And you have 2 priests that can do that. So now you have heal 12. So it's really, really interesting.
Do you guys feel then, it's always like you move everything, every reaction has an opposite reaction, right? And I think that's so true when you're thinking about meta design in any game, right? You have a deck come out or an army comes out, and then there's a reaction to it. And then there's a reaction to the reaction. And then there's my reaction to your reaction. It's like the great, Princess Bride, right? I know that you know that I know sort of thing in meta design. But do you think that grindiness, as we talk about cost the hybrid, or we talk about the change to shooting, to me, when I hear that to me maybe is the new role of shooting, or a new role of shooting, which is I'm not going to kill anything, but I'm going to get you to a point so that when I do charge, I'm not going to be stuck as long, right? I'm wondering if shooting's going to evolve more into, it's what we need to weaken someone so that when you do get into combat, you're not stuck there forever. But I mean, what do we think about that sort of? Is shooting going to fit into the competitive space, do we think, with these rule changes, or where are we sort of floating around where shooting's going to have its role?
I still assume that there are smart, devious people out there, some of them located in Texas and working for NASA, that are, maybe not him specifically, but there are people out here right now trying, and maybe already having broken, made ridiculous gunline armies that probably won't win the giant GT, but they will certainly go 4-2 and ruin a bunch of people's day, right? They're the classic. I think there's going to be gun lines out there that are the classic, terrifying internet build that serves as a mini boss and just filters out a number of lists. You unluckily run up against it and it has its good day and you lose. So I don't think it's gone. I think there will be people out there. I just think it's either has to be really good and efficient and is used for softening up your opponent, putting, 2-3 wounds on something you need it on so that charge sticks, or it's going to be people doing full gun line, degenerate full gun lines, because that's the only way they can actually make it work. And if you are not a waiver mitigation army like Undead or something else, that you're just going to be in waiver town, and it's going to be a pretty horrible experience if they're rolling hot. So I think, my first reaction is that shooting's going to be chip damage to soften charges on key targets, or full Monty, full shooting. I don't care if we can only kill things when they're devastated. That just means we have to devastate more stuff. So
yeah, it's the big question to me that I don't have an answer to yet. And some of it is meta dependent. If everybody's going to be running defense 3 berserker units, then shooting is going to be awesome. If nobody's running shooting, then being the only army that is running shooting is an advantage in a lot of matchups. So, but if everybody's building for the grind, and that means that they're taking a bunch of heal and high defense stuff, then that is also good against shooting. So maybe shooting won't be good. I mean, I've had people send me 17 pack hunter regiment lists already. So it's like people are going to try to spam shooting. And there's still a lot of power in, shooting units that unlock. That's always been true in Kings of War, and I think it's still true today. So if you're looking for those shooting builds, look for the armies that have good shooting core unlocks first. It's not, to me, it's the Goblin 6 War Machine lists. You can still do them. I don't know if they'll still be as effective as they were in third edition. But yeah, shooting is still here. I mean,
the elf shooting hordes are interesting to me, right? They shoot on 5s, but if you don't move, you're shooting on 4s, right? So I think the elf list is pretty interesting. You mentioned a few things. You mentioned Palace Guard, which I think are great. But yeah, I think there is going to be space there for shooting, because I found even if you waver and don't kill, if you're wavering that key unit that's going to be charging you in 2 turns and you waver it, in many ways it's as if you killed it. So I don't think the only being able to waver it is, a nerf, but there's still power there, is what I'm saying. Being able to identify a unit that you want to take out of the game for a turn and put some shooting resources in.
Yeah. I mean, I spent a while playing a army that needed to remove things with shoot. My Abyssal Dwarf list was based around that. Wavering is a lot of times useful, but it's not the same. Like killing the unit is killing the unit.
Yeah.
The other thing it removes is that there were so many times where something is injured, and getting it to double 1, a 3, or a 4 is doable with my shooting. Like you do that shooting, you get it to a, for 4 nerve check kills it. Doing those 4 extra points of damage to get it to devastated is like 30 more shots. It's some massive investment that, like, having that 2d6 roll be that additional damage, like rolling a 4 on 2d6 is a lot easier than like doing 4 damage against defense 5 with shooting. So I don't know that it's like shooting can't exist, but I'm not going to pretend that that isn't a huge change to the effectiveness of it at removing units. And yeah, it's great if you have part of your army devoted to shooting and you can waver a key unit and it's a huge FU to your opponent's plans. But if you're basing your game plan on removing units with shooting, it's hard. It's a lot harder. Doesn't mean it's impossible, and there'll be people who are doing it with very, very dangerous, and we'll see what comes out. But it is a lot harder.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we should sugarcoat it. I mean, you're definitely right. Shooting is weaker in that sense. I mean, I ended third edition playing a dwarf list where I won when I removed a key combat unit before the lines met, and I lost when my shooting was below average, and it didn't do that. And that was a key part of the strategy. So you can't do that anymore. You can't have your Goblin Whiz with Lightning Bolt 3 effectively do, 8 wounds, 1 plus the nerve check to a unit. And so it changes things. Shooting is definitely, I mean, it has the potential to not be very good, but it'll be interesting to see how players adapt to the new realities and find a use for it, because I do think it still has tactical use.
And there's a few of those potential outliers, right? They're few and far between, but you can find those units that were on 5-up shooting and stayed on 5-up shooting. Like there's not a lot, but you find one, you're like, that's interesting. If they have long range, not moving, puts them on 4s. Does 4 make them broken? Even in the new nerf shooting, decimators are an interesting one. It's tricky, but like they stayed on 4s. Okay. If they shoot without moving with 14-inch range, so it's a lot harder, but it is possible. Suddenly they're on 3s. Now I tried to do the math on them and it's not a huge difference. It's because they dropped to 20 attacks instead of 25. They on 4s, they were doing 12.5 hits. On 20 attacks. On 3s, they're not doing much more. So it's not like suddenly breaking them open, but they were pretty good hitting on 4s before, and they still hit on 4s. So there's some room there. So you want to try and find those. Most of the ones I've gotten excited about, I double check the app and I figure out that their shooting got worse by 1 and I'm no longer excited. But there's probably still some hiding out there. I had visions of naiad shooters, tons of regiments of them running around doing terrible things, and then I realized I got bumped to 5 and I lost interest. So
Well, like the ice elementals is one for me that I'm not sure about yet, because they went to melee 5 and shooting 4. So if they don't move, you can shoot on 3s and then surge them, so their shooting's more effective, but their combat's less effective. So is there something there? I mean, I don't know. I'm curious to see but that is when I think of shooting, I think there is some little spaces that are just for me are undecided. I just don't know where it's gonna shape up. But I don't. But my feeling, and I'm just curious. I don't think it's going from that sort of from the palette of what we build our armies with. I don't think it's a color that we just put the cap on and throw in the bin. We don't know how much maybe it's going to be on the palette, but I don't think we throw that color in the bin yet.
No, but I just think that like expect a lot of defense 6, expect some undead that don't waver, just don't care unless you break them, and the existence of probably 2 or 3 very viable defense 6 builds running around, plus undead of both flavors, plus high waver mitigation from some other armies means it's in a not great spot shooting. So you really have to have a purpose for it. You don't just sprinkle it in for no reason. Like you want to be intentional about what you're doing and pick the best version of it you have.
It's funny how much, Brenton, your comment about how this edition change feels like early third, and it's ringing more and more true. And it's funny having been here paying attention to the Kings of War scene for as many years as we all have. You kind of recognize archetypes, and it seems like we're replaying them. It's like suddenly people are talking about orc hordes again, just like Eric Trowbridge's that won Masters in 2019. And if you remember back then, everyone was saying shooting sucks, and like you were saying, either people were going, full frontal male nudity with a bunch of war machines, a la Keith Randall, or they weren't taking any, and they didn't take any, and so Eric won with a bunch of cheap, Orkling units that nobody could shoot off because they didn't have the shooting to do that because they thought it sucked. And then the next year at Masters, Eric brought the same list and he lost in the first round to John Vanasse, who took a bunch of flame bearer regiments, if I'm remembering correctly, which were like the perfect thing to shoot off a shit ton of Orklings. So I don't know. To me, it's very, very similar to early third. And I don't think no shooting is where we're going to end up. Maybe less shooting or different types of shooting.
Yeah, I look back at some of the lists that I had called out before Masters as being interesting or fun or I thought strong. And it was, Eric's Orcs and Orcs and Orcs. It was Dustin's Forces of Nature, which is elementals, Worm Rider hordes, greater earth elementals, and things that enable that. We had Aaron Chapman's Slave Orc hordes, and then the dwarf lists at the time were all Brocks and Rocks, mainly Rocks, right? Like Jeff Shilkin played a really fun, but it was 3 earth elemental hordes, 2 greater earth elementals, 2 dwarves on large beasts. It was defense 6, surgeable, hard to kill. Like so many of these lists, you looked at, I think Keith Randall played hordes of infantry backed up by war machines. So big hordes, which is not what you think of when you think Keith Randall playing things like pike blocks. And that's what early fourth feels like to me. I think it will pivot quickly. I think we have a larger, more engaged community, more people trying to game this stuff out. But I think that's what it early looks like. So then the question is like, what does it pivot to next? Like what comes next?
I'm curious what you guys think. We've touched a little bit on sort of grind. We've talked a little bit of shooting. I wonder where your guys' sort of barometer, our thermometer, ends on the hotness that is speed. Because if you ain't first, you're last, or that sort of alpha. With some of the changes. There are some good alpha units in the armies. Werewolves come to mind. I think the change to Alohi, they definitely needed more attacks. Makes complete sense. Where are you guys sort of in the sitting around speed. Are we going to see that still as an archetype, a perennial archetype? Is that grindiness? Is it going to be too much bouncing, or where are we thinking around alpha and speed?
I have no idea. I'll let you two more learned people. I don't have any alpha lists right now. So like I know a lot of them went out. I know some still exist. I think it's less of a thing, but I also think that as soon as the meta coughs up a bunch of big, slow moving, chunky, big footprint battle lines, that like tricky, quick alpha wants to come out and find a way to pick that apart. So I feel like there's going to be a lot of people. It might not be the first iteration, but there's going to be people finding the right tools to unlock those puzzles. And you two probably know a lot more about what those tools would be than me, because every time I looked for something that used to be a good alpha option, it's been sanded down and made a lot less deadly.
I think that the first thing to say is, with the new rule where essentially all units get ordered march, the classic second edition, flying hordes of Elohi or Dracons going 20 up your flank and pivoting in on turn 1 is now possible again. So the fast units take advantage of that ordered march type rule a lot better than, my slow speed 4 dwarf infantry do, even though they like it too, but speedy units can take advantage of that a lot more easily. So that's a buff to Alpha Strike. There's cavalry still not in a great spot with the rule change that they now lose all thunderous if they're hindered. One of my complaints with 4th is like, it feels like we learned a lot of lessons over the course of 6 years with 3rd edition that weren't necessarily transferred over. And I just want to say to these guys, like, there was a reason we changed the rules, that we, for example, only lost 1 thunderous when you were hindered. Like, there was a reason for that. So I think Cav are still in a tough spot.
What do you think, just staying on that Cav element, do you think that in not losing all the thunderous, the being able to pivot around terrain or the extra attacks, is that going to be you don't think, like, where is that on the mitigating that fully losing thunderous? Is it going to be enough, not enough?
I think in theory it should help, but in reality, especially against players who know what they're doing and are gonna use terrain to their advantage, it's gonna be tough. There's only so much maneuvering you can do, I think.
Maybe one of those things on paper seems like, okay, this makes them better, but if I'm really smart, I'm going to use terrain to where there is, okay, you can pivot past it, but once you fully align, you're in terrain. There's going to be other ways you manipulate board space.
So again, I mean, I think it's just going to be meta dependent. Again, like we're saying, if everyone's just going to take a bunch of slow melee hordes, then alpha is going to be good. Nimble units are going to be good. There's still definitely certain units that can do it. Like werewolves, they nerfed berserkers, but they just made new berserkers and werewolves for some reason. So that's still a viable list. The lions.
Okay, and this is how I feel. When I was reading the werewolf, I was thinking about, like, there's a line from Kevin Smith. I think it's from Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, when Ben Affleck's looking at Jay and he's like, this guy, he said, when's it going to be my time? And that's what I'm thinking about the werewolves. For years, they've been going, when's it going to be my time? And it is like now your time. And I have a bunch of Mantic werewolves that I painted and played with when they were just so bad and so overcosted that I don't even care, man. I think they're awesome. They're going in the list. Yeah, but I think they're a fantastic unit. And I wonder if maybe we won't see full alpha armies, but we'll see armies will have an alpha battle group, like 2 werewolf hordes and a Lycanus, or whatever. Used to be like people would run that sometimes. I wonder if those armies that have access to that one really good alpha unit is maybe there's not going to be full armies built around it, but there'll be jigsaw pieces in the puzzle.
Yeah, I think the edge is taken off of at least what I consider like the classic Alpha Strike armies, like Green Lady, where the order of Forsaken, where you're unlocking units, and they unlocked, the Pegasus that were also speed 10 and Perfect Chaff, and the heroes that you needed to inspire them and things. And so because you need to take, I mean, there are a few lists where cavalry is core, but I just don't think you can replicate the power of some of the alpha lists in third edition. But I think you're exactly right, Jeremy. Its speed is still great. Its speed didn't get bad. It just, you can't build an army of it now.
And I don't know, I'm such a homer for combined arms. It's my favorite type of army building. It's my favorite type of army to play against. So I don't know if my instinct that combined arms is going to be good. I always feel I always feel that way, So I don't know, maybe my naivete at the moment is like wanting to put points is that the combined arms is going to be a real legitimate strong, not just like a way, but like a strong way to build armies.
Yeah, what I always think when people talk about combined arms is something that Tom Robinson said once that I remembered, which is the game is about board control. So just taking a bunch of slow infantry that doesn't shoot, doesn't do anything, yeah, you control the 5 to 10 inches in front of you or something, but that's not really that threatening, and it doesn't cause a lot of problems for your opponent. So instead of thinking, I think combined arms is definitely a good strategy. You just have to keep in mind, how are you going to get and keep board control when you're doing that? And so that's not specific to fourth edition, but that's just what I always think of when we talk about combined arms. Your units need to do something. You can't just take a bunch of slow infantry and expect to win, even in fourth edition.
I'm curious, one element we've sort of touched on a little bit here and there, but I think there's been such a big change to characters, right? Characters and our warlords and champions scoring. I know there's been some debate and discussion around combat characters. How much is the extra dice warlords get to roll for command orders? Warlords are really expensive. What's the opportunity cost there, right? Of spending more points to get that extra die. I've mostly been playing Northern Alliance. I run an Ice Blade, who's a combat warlord, mainly to get the unlocks. And then I've been running Ice Queens with heal support, which I'm on board with you, Tom. I think heal is so good, especially in this new environment. I mean, my Berserker regiments with defense 3, but with Iron Resolve and heal, they stick around. So I do see the power of those supports characters sitting back, sitting on an objective and doing something, right? They're casting spells. I always would say, if you say heal costs 20 points, it's going to be, I casted heal once, it costs you 20 points per cast. Whereas if you casting heal every turn, all of a sudden your points cost per time used goes down. And I think, I don't know, I always felt there was something there and thinking about it in that sort of way. But where are you, Tom, now in thinking when you're building your competitive list? Where are you sort of around the warlord versus champion or combat character versus support character? Where are you sort of around heroes starting the edition?
Well, after listening to 19 videos of Adam Ballard telling me that all individual melee heroes are
bad or horrible,
dog shit, I'm a little battered. I feel like putting them in a list. I might need to take a couple of months before I have
go to a support group. Go to a support group for combat characters.
But individuals get unit strength, like that's huge. So I think the support casting type individuals have a completely new lease on life. I'm running 2 priests in my first draft Basilean list with Bane Chant and Heal, and they have the Iron Resolve command. So like I was saying earlier, that's heal 3 plus heal 2 or 3 extra, depending on how good you are at rolling dice. So I think that those type of units are big beneficiaries of the rules changes. Spells, offensive spells, magic missiles, they go down if you stand still. So suddenly you're casting Alchemist Curse on a 3+ or Blood Boil on a 3+. That seems good to me. Even Lightning Bolt on a 3+. That's pretty nice. So I do think that there's still a role for individuals. Keeping in mind what I was talking about earlier, which is heroes are a lot more expensive across the board. So it's not going to be, you're not going to win through your heroes, but I think having some heroes is definitely important. There's little things like okay, you put a goblin whiz on a horse, and now you have a speed 9 or speed 10, scenario piece for under 100 points, and just give it one spell. And that's a completely new type of unit that we didn't really have in third edition. So I'm interested to see what people do with that. I just saw George O'Connell post a list where he keyed onto that idea, and he's taking a goblin list that has like 3 or 4 of those type of characters on horses, and it's all just speed 10, wingets and whizzes on horseback, and he's going to run around and play scenario with those. So that's a really interesting idea. So I don't know, a lot of new possibilities.
I don't know if it's going to shake out this way, but this is how I want it to go. I think as people lean into those support pieces, it'd be really fun if combat characters do get a role and it's just hunting down and killing those other pieces. I don't know that that's going to be true. They still cost so much, and when you run into armies that don't have that, but I would love to see a world where you have, vampire lords or whoever else suddenly really effective at turning off a bunch of people's abilities they were counting on in the game. Like, your army works because of this command, and I've gone out and murdered your commanders. But we'll see. I don't think that's how it will be. But I remember parts of early second edition where that was true, where you had mage hunting characters and you had war machine hunting characters, and you had this sort of whole gameplay going on where they're chasing and counter chasing and that stuff. And I would love to see it again.
I mean, having impactful characters to me speaks to like the flavor and game narrative, right? If you're playing the movie in your head as you're playing a game, it's cool to have these really cool dynamic moments. And it's nice to see character impact that's not just, oh, this guy's unkillable or this. So I think the characters that can play scenario to me are the ones I'm really interested in seeing what develops in that pot with those characters. How, do they push a lever, and is a lever then pushed to then affect their level? Are we going to see that are they going to move enough of the needle that people have to think about what are they going to do against characters? But I think that's one of my favorite changes in our year-end review. That was one of my top changes in fourth. Was I think a lot of what they've done with the characters is really cool. I love the bigger base from a hobbyist standpoint. Being able to do little mini dioramas is so much fun. So I'm really excited about the character change. Cool. Well, anything else? We sort of covered the main archetypes of lists. Is there any other units or play styles or things on your guys' sort of curiosity radar?
One thing that I wanted to mention, and I'll point people to an article that I think came out today or yesterday. Will have been out for a couple of weeks by the time this airs. But the website Data and Dice, which is a great Kings of War website, went and looked at kind of the points inflation that has occurred from third to fourth. And according to the guy who runs the website, units on average increased about 15% in points costs, and heroes, way more than that. But the key thing that I took away from that is that inflation, so to speak, hasn't been spread evenly across units. So his insight that I took away was the two types of units that have not seen points inflation are hordes, like infantry hordes, and titans. And so it struck me that a lot of my more competitive friends that I speak to and are sending me lists already, they have kind of naturally keyed in on that idea. And they're sending me a lot of lists with Elf Palace Guard hordes and dragons, 2 dragons with 2 battalions, or other similar lists that can do that. The Twilight Kin spear hordes, plus there's, what I have to assume is an undercosted Void Lurker, which are like 230 points now for some reason. It's crazy. But not all units went up in cost. So I think as you're looking to build a competitive list, look at the ones that didn't go up in cost for whatever reason, even with the new points formula. And that is where I would look first in trying to find those kind of not undercosted units or broken units, but just the efficient units, the ones that aren't suffering under this new points formula. I think it's a pretty interesting idea.
Yeah, I think a huge amount of that percentage is in characters. Like the average out, because I find when I make a list right now that I'm not getting less units than what I had before, but when I go and try and add characters in, there isn't much when there was before. But yeah, I think, or even look for stuff that went down. I think siege breakers went down in cost. And look a little bit filthy, a few other things. So yeah, look at what stayed the same and what went down. Because if everything else is going up in cost, the things that stayed the same got cheaper.
Yeah, and it's exciting. I think my big takeaway from this is that trying to find something new is a fun experiment. It's like we mentioned thought experiment or all this sort of cerebral space that we exist in. Outside of maybe painting, I think wargamers spend a lot of time in this intellectual space, right? Thinking about lists or thinking about armies or thinking about combinations, strategies. And I think that's a cool part. I mean, I dig that as part of the experience, and trying to find the positive in things. A new edition always is like that, right? It's thinking about trying to find new ways to play, new armies to build. So people are so creative. Anytime stuff is released out into the ether, things are found, strategies are come that you never even thought. So to me, I'm just excited to see people's creativity.
I think the thing for me is that in an early edition, especially one where so much has been stripped back and simplified, you don't have to be that complicated. Like, I feel like near the end of edition, you were really looking for complicated synergies, things stacking on things that make like this great whole that makes it that much stronger than something else. And here if you find the good spell that works with the good unit, that's good enough early on to make some pretty powerful combinations of lists. That that thing that looks good on paper and has a command that makes it survive longer, that's enough. You don't have to be too clever for your own good. You can just put good units on the table that do their job for a while.
Like my man Michael Scott says to Dwight, right? Keep it simple, stupid. KISS.
So it's just, I feel like when I look at the back end of third, there were really interesting but lists that you would look at and not understand how they worked right away. Some of the halfling lists, you looked at them and you were like, how is this good? And then you see it on the table and you're like, that's exactly how it's good, because all of these pieces do interesting, creative things in different angles. And that's not necessarily true at the beginning of fourth. I could be wrong. Looking into the future is a fool's game. Predicting things is an idiot's job that we're doing. But I do feel like that first wave is, the good units marching up the board that are just hard to deal with and have some piece of kit within their list, whether it's the right kind of heal, whether it's the right command, whether it's the right kind of terrain mitigation as a command, things like that, just make it really hard to deal with. And that's what you deal with in that first wave. And then as the game gets more mature, more rules are added, more people have to think around things differently. It gets more complicated and synergy based. But at the beginning, it really is just powerful stats with something that enhances or modifies it going against each other as the top lists.
Yeah, I think early in the edition, this is how I come up with the list: is you just take a bunch of the good stuff and then you pare that back until it's a list that actually can compete in scenario and compete in various different types of matchups. But early on, people are just going to say, well, okay, so what do I need to do to take 4 Siegebreaker hordes or regiments now, I guess? What do I need to do to take 4 Lion Snarl units? How can I just spam the best stuff? And that's what people are going to try first, but I will bet that's not going to end up being the most powerful list. That's just the most obvious lists. And it's not bad to start there. And maybe that's where people will start, but I bet we will get more creative and figure out what types of units actually make a difference on the table that aren't the obvious ones as the edition continues.
Now, do you guys have a gut feeling about, are we going to stay at 2,300? Are we going to move to 25? 23 has been sort of our standard for a long time, but with some of these points increases in certain areas, and I know it's so early and this is just pure on the soapbox, but do you guys have an initial gut sense of points wise where we'll...
I can only speak to America. I've only played in like one UK tournament. So I think US will go up because no one likes to play with less toys. It's just generally the way it is, that there is a feeling in the air where people are saying, you don't quite get as much for 2,300 as you did before. And once that is the general feeling, I think the community will just expect to get what they had before. And if that means 25, that's what they'll do. It's the same reason we're playing 23 in this edition, because, we were playing a little less in second, and people were like, I want the amount of toys I think I want. And it bumped up a little. I just think that's how it is. So my expectation is it'll bump up. I'd be happy to be wrong. I actually like the idea of us trying it at 2,000 or keeping it at like 2,250 or something and seeing what those kinds of restrictions do to the different unit types. But my gut is that we're just gonna, let the belt out a little. We're American. There's no one's tightening the belt here. We're going to let it loose and people are going to play with all their toys.
Yeah, I'm pro whatever the most fun is, whatever creates the most fun games. Age is just a number and points are just made up. So it doesn't really matter if we play 25 or 2,300, if it's the same amount of units are on the table and it's not taking a lot of extra time. So I put up a post on Facebook a couple days ago about that inflation that we're talking about. And by my calculations, a 2,300 point game in third edition is equivalent to a 2,100 point game in fourth edition. And you need to go up to 2,500 points to get for a fourth edition list to get back to the 2,300 third edition list. So that's just back of the envelope math. Who knows if it actually checks out, but I expect we'll stay at 23 for at least the first couple tournaments. And then if people have a strong feeling either way, I think we'll figure it out. We'll get there.
Yeah, it should be fun to see how that shakes out, because I'm kind of in the same, whatever people want to go and whatever's fun. Like, I'm not against points going up, just on I have no strong opinion about it. I'm like you, Tom. I'm like, whatever makes for fun games. But I also think it's cool sometimes to make tough choices can be good too. There's spaces for both those, right? Make an environment where you have to make interesting choices in your list, and then also make an environment where you get to bring all the fun stuff that you spent many months painting. So cool. Well, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll share our final thoughts and we'll wrap up the show. We'll be right back.
Hello, this is Duncan Rhodes from the Duncan Rhodes Painting Academy, and I hope you're about to apply a second thin coat just there whilst you're listening to Countercharge.
I'm Ronnie from Mantic Games, and you're listening to Countercharge.
And we are back. So I think it's going to be an interesting first 6 months, 6 to 10 months. I think to me, my first benchmark is when the second Invasion book comes out. What's that going to be like? That's sort of in thinking about what's coming up, what are going to be these interesting inflection points, because this first Invasion book is coming out with the rule book, right? They're coming out sort of in many ways as a pair. So I'm really curious to see sort of how the Invasion book sort of ekes out, curious to see sort of where points. If you had some stuff on your vision board for you guys, let's start with you, Tom. What are some questions that you're curious to see maybe that might be answered in the first six to 8 months?
Well, I think you keyed onto it. It's that next book. What is that going to say about what we can expect for the next couple of years? And are other armies going to get anything in that book, or are the fears going to come true that you might have to wait a couple of years to get something? I'm very interested in that. I'm interested to see how this new Zerkali army does. It seems good to me. It doesn't seem overpowered. There's some really interesting units. So who's going to be the one, at least in my local area, to take the plunge and start bringing them to tournaments? So I'm interested to see how that shakes out. And, there's a lot of new tactical possibilities that come with a lot of the core rule changes. And, I was at a tournament in December with Adam Ballard, and he was showing me all these things like, well, if you put a unit here behind this unit with sticky combats, it doesn't shift, but then it will shift. And I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about, but it sounds super interesting. And I'm sure you're going to catch me out on a battle report they're going to post on the internet with it. And I'll learn that way and then use it. So I'm excited to see what are the new tactics that people come up with that these new rules allow for. It's Christmas Eve tomorrow. This is literally Christmas for me. I love this meta shakeup and these new possibilities so much. As a busy dad of 4 with a demanding job, I'm not really relishing painting a whole bunch of new units for armies I already own to get them on the table. But the other part of it, the new lists, the new tactics, it's literally Christmas for me.
I'm excited to see changes in the community. Mantic has made a big sort of bet around Kings of War that by entrusting the development of 4 to Alessio, in shaping it the way they did, in culling the armies and changing how they're doing things, in a way attempting to change its image and grow it in a certain direction and make intentional choices around what they want it to be going forward. I'm super excited to see how that pans out in the community. Are we seeing new players? Are we seeing different kinds of players? Are we seeing different kinds of events, new armies? Like all of that stuff, I'm just excited to see. It's a big shakeup, and to see positive change come out of that shakeup is really what I'm excited to see over the next 6 to 8 months.
Yeah, great points. I'm right there with you. I like you, Tom. I'm super excited to see the all in everyone's beat laboratory, all the new concoctions and stuff coming, and new strategies. All that stuff. I think with change, the other side of the coin of the challenge of change is all the excitement, right? And I think us as a community, we should keep that in mind. We can, on the other side of every change that maybe you're struggling with, is something that's super cool or that's interesting or that there's room for space to think about. And to me, it just always comes back to, in the past, there's always been frustration about wanting Mantic to invest more in Kings. And that's what they're doing now. They're investing like their bottom dollar. They're investing money in the game, right? So to me, that's good. Having Kings at a higher threshold of Mantic's focus, I think are going to lead to positive things. And it doesn't mean that it's not always one step back, 2 steps forwards, or maybe a change we don't like or whatever. But I think in general, the more that we can get the lens on this game, whether from Mantic itself or from getting it into a more accessible to new players or trying to get it in the stores, I think is super important because we play a niche of a niche of a niche style game. And I think we always need to be thinking about how do we bring new players in. There needs to be new players coming into a game for it to be healthy and survive. And playing a ranks and flanks game, and there are popular ranks and flanks games. So I don't think it's impossible to create a vibrant, new feeling, fresh feeling game around this sort of refined, I don't want to say antiquated game style, but I'll say refined ranks and flanks style of gaming.
Classic.
Great. I love it. Classic. How do we acknowledge the things that we want to see change in, but how do we do that within a solution driven structure of a way of trying to create really at its core what brought so many people to Kings, which is a great community, an easy to play, hard to master rule set, and in an environment that was welcoming and a place for people to come and enjoy a style of game that is super fun and you get a lot out of. So just as my holiday wish is that we let's take a moment and think about all the cool stuff we're getting in this new. And again, I say that in the vein where critiquing is important. And that's one thing that Mantic has said that I've said before in the past. They're going to have to put their money where their mouth is, in that by saying, hey, we're going to be doing all the game development ourselves. We're going to be listening to our RC around rules balance. Now it's going to be up to them over the next 6 to 8 months to show us that the invasion books are going to come out on time, that they're going to listen to player feedback. Because I think player agency in Kings is really one of the magical elements that is hard to maintain over the years, right? Is to have a game system that you as a player feel you have agency in its development.
And part of that is like, there's a number of decisions Mantic has made over the years that have created a situation that they're dealing with now that's sort of hard. They accepted a huge number of Warhammer refugees into the game and officially sort of supported their armies and made expansions specifically to bring those in. And that like ballooned the number of armies that they were supporting, and it ballooned the number of armies they're supporting they had no intention potentially of ever supporting or creating whole lines to. And that's something that they've been for years trying to sort of like reckon with and figure out. The sort of model agnostic thing where it's like people are like, it's a model agnostic game, and it's like, well, Mantic really does want you to play with their models. They haven't said it's model agnostic for years. That's sort of a community now driven ideal of it. And that the final one there is that like they have entrusted game design to the community, to members of the community for years. And that has created a sense of ownership over the game design within the community that they're now pulling back some on, not entirely, right? But they're pulling back on some, and that can be a very difficult thing to navigate for the company. So they've benefited from community-driven game design, keeping their game alive and fresh and updated for years. And now they're in a position where they're having to deal with a lot of people who feel they own the game, trying to tell them what they should do with their game or what they should have done. And it's a difficult thing to deal with. And I wish them all the luck and support in the world figuring that out, because it's tough. The thing for me that's important is it's my favorite war game I've ever played. Outside of pure nostalgia, playing Warhammer as a kid, from a like adult perspective, looking at the friends I've made, the tournaments I've been to, the events I've run, it's my favorite. And I know for a lot of other people, it holds a special place for them as well. And they just want so much for it to continue being that way. So a lot of times things come across on the internet as criticism, but they're coming from a place of deep love for the game and just not knowing how to deal with changes to it that people might feel could be detracting from it. And we just don't know. So I've personally taken the stance of going to try it out, going to have as much fun I can with it, because I love the game and I love the community.
Any final thoughts, Tom?
No, I'm just excited. I'm excited to play more games. That came out at a time where we don't have a ton of time. At least I don't for gaming. And so I'm ready for the new year and more tournaments to put all these theories that we've been talking about tonight and people have been chatting about on Facebook and Discord and elsewhere to the test. So I'm just ready and excited.
Yeah, I want to get back to our like once every 2 weeks. We've had good rhythms. I think in the past, Tom, where we were playing on the regular, and those are always so fun to get those games in. So I'm like you. I can't wait just to try. And now that the list builder's up there, I'm making lists all the time. Yes. Oh my God. To me, like if you don't have a digital list builder these days, bro, I can't play your game.
Right.
I mean, first world problems, I know, but having that digital army builder, I'm like, making lists all day long.
Yeah. That's just testing stuff out, and yeah, we would need to get back to that for sure.
Well, thanks a bunch for coming on the show, guys. Hope you enjoyed that episode. Going into the new year, we'll get back to doing our, we had kind of taken a break on doing army reviews in lieu of the new edition. So we have plans to do a bunch of army reviews. We'll start taking a look at the tournaments and seeing sort of what starts to rise to the top when it comes to the competitive landscape. And then I'm thinking we'll come back and do another Scrying Gems episode, guys, when the first invasion book comes out. or maybe in a few months once we have some tournament results. Post Adepticon might be a good idea. Clash at Adepticon will be really interesting to see sort of what rises to the surface there. But we'll do a circle back here spring or sort of, middle of next year to see kind of where things are at. But thanks again for coming on the show. And with that, remember to always keep countercharging.
Thanks for listening. And we'll see you next time on Countercharge. Please let us know what you thought of the show by emailing us at counterchargepodcast@gmail.com, on Twitter at countercharge15, or by commenting on the Countercharge Kings of War podcast Facebook group. If you enjoy the show, you can help others find out about it by leaving positive reviews on iTunes. Until next time, keep countercharging. Music is a composition of Kevin MacLeod and is licensed under Creative Commons.